On the eve of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, conservative media commentator Tucker Carlson used his nightly Fox News platform to ask why the Democratic establishment was being hostile towards Russian President Vladimir Putin. Since the day that Donald Trump became president, Democrats in Washington have told you it's your patriotic duty to hate Vladimir Putin, Carlson said. Anything less than hatred for Putin is treason. He mused that hating Putin had become the central purpose of America's foreign policy, which, he argued, could force the United States into a conflict in Eastern Europe, something no one from either side of politics has called for. Mr. Carlson insisted his audience ask themselves, "Why do I hate Putin so much? Has Putin ever called me a racist?" Loading. A day earlier, former US President Donald Trump shared an equally unusual take on a conservative radio show, seeming to praise Putin's peacekeeping operation in Ukraine's separatist-held regions of Donetsk and Luhansk as genius and very savvy. "How smart is that?" Mr. Trump asked. "There were more army tanks than I've ever seen. They are going keep peace all right." Since the full-scale Russian assault began, the host of America's most watched cable news show and his longtime ally, the former US president, have scaled back their rhetoric concerning the Russian autocrat. Fox personality Tucker Carlson said it was obvious that getting Ukraine to join NATO was the key to inciting war with Russia. But their first instinct revealed Mr. Putin's creeping influence in right-wing American politics, which has gone well beyond what US intelligence agencies called an attempt by the Russian leader meddle in the 2016 presidential election. It also showed how far some Republicans have drifted from the red peril paranoia of the Cold War era, when another of their presidents, Ronald Reagan, dubbed the Soviet Union an evil empire. And even since 2012, when then presidential nominee Mitt Romney called Russia America's #1 geopolitical foe. Carlson's surprising new audience. After Carlson's comments aired on Fox News, American journalist Robert Mackey counted 4 separate instances of translated clips from Tucker Carlson tonight appearing in Russian news reports in under a week. In one primetime address, which was later dubbed in Russian, Carlson declared that Ukraine was not a democracy and labeled the country a client state of the Biden administration. Loading. After researching the interplay between Fox News and the Republican Party for more than a decade, Matthew Gertz, a senior fellow at media watchdog Media Matters, said he was not surprised. He recalled right-wing media commentators comparing Mr. Putin's strength with the perceived softness of then-President Barack Obama, a Democrat, and sees the cable network's recent coverage as a more extreme version of the same impulse. They were contrasting him with the particular type of masculinity that they saw in Putin, with his judo and posing shirtless on a horse, and using him as a foil to make Barack Obama look bad, Mr. Gertz said. Commentators say Vladimir Putin's hypermasculine image has been held in contrast to Democrat leaders by some Fox News hosts over the years. One widely circulated meme compared a photo of Mr. Putin looking stern on horseback with one of Mr. Obama smiling while riding a bicycle. Fox News made it the pick of the day, amid Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014. "People are looking at Putin as one who wrestles bears and drills for oil," Sarah Palin, former Republican vice presidential candidate, told another popular host, Sean Hannity. "They look at our president as one who wears mum jeans and equivocates and bloviates." In 2008, Republican vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin said a Russian invasion of Ukraine would lead to a war with the US. Just 6 years earlier, Ms. Palin had taken a much tougher stance on Russia. In 2008, when she was running for vice president and Mr. Putin's troops were invading Georgia, she argued in favor of strong US sanctions against Russia, as well as allowing Georgia and Ukraine to join NATO. As Mr. Gertz pointed out, certain conservatives in the Republican Party at that time expressed admiration for Mr. Putin's emboldening of the Russian Orthodox Church and anti-LGBTI sentiment. In recent weeks, like Mr. Obama before him, President Biden has similarly been accused of not standing up to Mr. Putin soon enough, by Republicans and Fox News pundits alike. One early poll found 62% of Americans believe Mr. Putin would not have acted if Mr. Trump was still president. Republican Party's Putin paradox. When Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton in the 2016 presidential race, aided by a Russian hack and leak operation, it became more challenging for Mr. Trump's supporters to openly criticize the Kremlin, according to Mr. Gertz. You might expect the idea of a foreign dictator attempting to alter US presidential elections would be something that would unite the country in some way, he said. But what you saw was a fairly wide swathe of the Republican Party and the conservative media trying to find a way to make excuses for it because Donald Trump spoke so favorably about Vladimir Putin. As recently as this week, Mr. Trump told Hannity that he got along with Mr. Putin, Chinese President Xi Jinping, and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. "I got along with them well," he said. "That doesn't mean they are good people. It doesn't mean anything other than the fact that I understood them, and perhaps they understood me, maybe they understood me even better." Many Republicans, including Congresswoman Liz Cheney, Senators Mitt Romney and Lindsey Graham, and former Vice President Mike Pence, have slammed Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Congresswoman Liz Cheney has slammed what she called the Putin wing of the Republican Party. And a recent poll found 66% of Republican voters placed the blame for the war entirely on Mr. Putin's shoulders. But Mr. Gertz said some right-wing media personalities see the war as a political opportunity. "I think the cynicism is pretty extreme," Mr. Gertz said, of Carlson and his colleagues. They all made a bet that the most important thing they could do with the Russia-Ukraine crisis is to attack the Biden administration. Typically, the way this happens in foreign policy is that the Republican Party and Fox News, which reflects it in a lot of ways, has both an interventionist wing and an isolationist wing. The interventionists will attack a Democratic administration for not doing enough, but the isolationists will attack them for doing anything at all. The pincer move, as Mr. Gertz described it, is designed to hammer the Democratic administration from both sides and can change from hour to hour, or even segment to segment. Which side is winning? That isolationist instinct can be traced back to the early 20th century, according to Michael Kazin, a history professor at Georgetown University who studies US politics and social movements. After World War I, Senate Republicans voted down a bill to join the League of Nations in order to, as they saw it, protect American sovereignty. In 1940, many joined the America First Committee, which opposed arming to fight the fascist movement, which was gaining momentum in Europe. Even during the early Cold War, many anti-communist Republicans wanted the United States to depend on its nuclear superiority to counter Soviet power, rather than enlarging the military. There's a tradition, which in some ways Reagan went against, actually, ironically, by wanting the US to be much more aggressive and really expand the defense budget tremendously, which he did during his presidency, Professor Kazin said. So, in that sense, Trump is a reversion to a very strong tradition in the Republican Party, which really begins when the US is a victor in World War I, or one of the victors in World War I, and wants to help make the world more democratic. In recent weeks, the tug-of-war between the more hawkish traditionalists and Trump loyalists inside the Republican Party has come to a head. It's very dangerous to have one large part of one of the major political parties in America being very dubious about whether it's a good idea to counter a nuclear power, which is invading another country without any provocation, Professor Kazin said. On the other hand, I should say that most Republicans are now supporting a tough stance against Russia, because they understand that's popular among most voters. A more recent poll found a majority of Americans support the sanctions leveled at the Kremlin by the United States and its allies in Europe and elsewhere. This has left some Republican members, such as North Carolina's Madison Cawthorn, whose labeling of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as a thug was roundly condemned, increasingly isolated. Republican Madison Cawthorn called Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky a thug and his government incredibly evil. Some of those spurned by Mr. Trump, including Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and Liz Cheney, who was ousted from